The phone rang at exactly 9:17 p.m., and when he saw her name light up the screen, his first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. Not because he didn't care, but because that single call felt heavier than any conversation they'd had before. Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and how old are you? And let me ask you something honestly. If one phone call could reveal whether someone truly loved you or was just testing how much you'd tolerate, would you answer it? Her name was Eleanor Whitmore, and to the public she was a billionaire investor with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. To him, she was just Eleanor, the woman who laughed softly at his bad jokes and listened when he talked about things no one else asked him anymore. His name was Robert Hale, 72 years old, retired school counselor, widowed for 9 years, and very clear about one thing. At his age, he had no energy left for games. Or at least, that's what he believed before Eleanor entered his life. They'd met in the most unremarkable way possible. A quiet charity luncheon where Robert had only gone because a former student begged him to attend. Eleanor sat beside him, no entourage, no flashing wealth, just a calm presence and curious eyes. She asked him questions that weren't polite filler. She asked about his late wife, about what scared him now, about what still made him feel useful. That kind of attention does something to a man who thought his most meaningful conversations were behind him. What Robert didn't know was that Eleanor had come with a purpose. After 2 failed marriages and a lifetime of men who wanted access to her fortune more than her heart, she made a quiet decision. She would find a good man, a senior man, someone grounded enough to choose her even if she had nothing. And the only way she trusted herself to believe it was to test patience, not with drama, but with restraint and pressure. At first, everything felt gentle. Coffee dates turned into long walks. Long walks turned into evenings where time slipped away unnoticed. Eleanor never talked about her wealth. She drove an ordinary car. She wore simple clothes. Robert assumed she was comfortable, maybe well off, but nothing more. And that assumption mattered more than either of them realized. Then came the small tests. She'd arrive late without explanation and watch his reaction. She'd cancel plans last minute, then apologize in a way that felt sincere but incomplete. Each time, Robert felt a flicker of irritation, followed by a deeper question. Was he being too patient, or was this just what understanding looked like at this stage of life? If you were him, would you speak up, or would you stay quiet to keep the peace? Eleanor noticed everything. The way his jaw tightened when he felt dismissed. The way he took a breath before responding instead of snapping. To her, patience had always been something men claimed to have until money or ego was involved. Robert's patience felt different. It wasn't passive, it was thoughtful. And that scared her more than anger ever could. One evening, over dinner, she asked him directly what he expected from a relationship at his age. Robert didn't hesitate. He said he wanted honesty, calm, and someone who wouldn't test him just to see if he'd break. Eleanor smiled, but inside, something twisted, because she was already doing exactly that. The call that night wasn't accidental. She waited all day, debating whether to go through with it. Her assistant told her it was unnecessary, even cruel. But Eleanor needed to know. She needed to see what happened when patience was pushed to its edge. So she called him late, knowing he valued routine, knowing surprises unsettled him more now than they used to. When Robert answered, her voice sounded different, tired, distant. She told him she needed a favor, something complicated, something that required trust without explanation. She said she needed him to meet her the next morning, early, no questions asked, and hinted that if he couldn't, she'd understand. The silence that followed felt endless. Inside Robert's mind, a war broke out. Part of him felt used. Another part felt protective. He wondered if this was the moment he'd promised himself he wouldn't tolerate anymore. And yet, there was something in her voice that felt like a crack in armor, not manipulation. Still, he said he needed time to think. After they hung up, Eleanor stared at the city lights from her penthouse window, suddenly aware of how lonely all that glass and steel felt. She told herself this test was necessary. If he passed, she could finally stop hiding. If he failed, it would hurt less now than later. But for the first time, doubt crept in. What if patience wasn't something to test, but something to protect? Robert sat alone in his quiet house, phone resting face down on the table, heart heavier than it had been in years. He thought about his late wife, about promises he'd broken to himself, about whether love at this age was supposed to feel this uncertain. And then his phone buzzed again. A single message from Eleanor appeared on the screen, changing everything he thought he knew about her. The message was short, almost too short for what it stirred inside him. It read, "I should tell you something before tomorrow. I haven't been completely honest." Robert felt his chest tighten. Not anger, not yet, but a familiar ache that came from realizing the ground beneath you might not be solid. He stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering, wondering if this was the moment patience turned into self-respect. If you were sitting there with him, would you reply right away? Or would you protect your peace and wait? He typed back slowly, choosing each word like it mattered, because it did. He told her he appreciated the honesty, but he wouldn't agree to anything without understanding what he was walking into. He added, gently but firmly, that at this stage of life, surprises felt less like romance and more like risk. When he hit send, he felt strangely calm, as if he'd finally drawn a line he should have drawn long ago. Eleanor read his reply twice, then a third time. This wasn't the reaction she'd rehearsed in her head. There was no pleading, no flattery, no rush to prove himself. Just clarity. And it landed harder than any test result ever had. She realized in that moment that she wasn't just testing his patience anymore. She was testing her own fear of being chosen without armor. She called him again, this time without the late-night drama. Her voice was steady, vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in years. She told him the truth, not all the financial details yet, but enough. She admitted she'd been testing him, watching how he handled disappointment, boundaries, uncertainty. She admitted she was afraid that if he knew who she really was, everything would change. And then she said something that surprised them both. She said she didn't want to test him anymore. Robert listened without interrupting, though his heart beat loudly in his ears. When she finished, there was a pause, the kind where the next sentence decides everything. He told her he understood fear. He'd lived with it since his wife passed. Fear of loving again, fear of being invisible, fear of wasting what little time felt truly his. But he also told her that patience wasn't infinite. It was a gift, not a challenge. The next morning they met anyway, at the same quiet cafe where they'd shared their first long conversation. Eleanor looked different, lighter and heavier at the same time. She didn't lead with explanations. She led with an apology, a real one, without justification. Then she told him everything. About the wealth, the assistance, the failed marriages, the exhaustion of never knowing if someone loved her or the life she represented. Robert sat back, absorbing it all. The number itself didn't shock him as much as he expected. What surprised him was how little it changed the way he felt. He told her that money didn't scare him, but manipulation did. He said he wasn't angry, just cautious. He asked her a question in return, one that shifted the air between them. He asked if she was ready to be known without control. Eleanor didn't answer right away. She looked out the window, watching people pass by who had no idea who she was or what she owned. And for the first time, that anonymity felt comforting. She said yes quietly, like it was a promise she intended to keep. She told him she didn't need him to prove anything anymore. She just wanted to build something honest, even if it meant moving slower than she was used to. What followed wasn't a grand romantic moment. It was better. It was two people renegotiating what love looked like when time mattered and patience had weight. Robert told her his boundaries. No more tests, no more games. Eleanor agreed, not because she feared losing him, but because she respected him. And respect, at their age, felt like the truest form of affection. Over the weeks that followed, things changed in subtle ways. Eleanor stopped orchestrating situations and started showing up as herself. Robert stopped bracing for disappointment and started trusting his instincts again. There were awkward conversations, moments of doubt, but no more hidden agendas. When people eventually learned who Eleanor was, Robert watched closely, not at her, but at himself. And he realized something important. He still chose her. One evening, months later, Eleanor made another call. This time it wasn't a test. It was an invitation, simple and sincere, asking him to join her not as an experiment, but as a partner. Robert smiled before answering, feeling the quiet confidence that comes when patience has been honored, not exploited. If this story made you think about your own boundaries, your own patience, or the courage it takes to be honest later in life, take a moment to reflect on that. And if it moved you even a little, I'd love for you to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe for more stories that remind us love doesn't expire with age. And tell me in the comments, if you were in Robert's place, would you have answered that first call?